of the Sustainable Sanitation Alliance, the working group that focuses on productive sanitation and food security. So everything connected with recovery of nutrients and other resources from our sanitation systems. So you're almost welcome to this webinar that is going to be looking at standards and certification systems or related systems and schemes and how they can contribute to the recovery of nutrients from sanitation and waste management systems. We have quite a packed agenda for you over the next 90 minutes and an exciting lineup of speakers and panelists that have all graciously availed their time and expertise to share their experiences and knowledge with us today. So I'm definitely very excited as well to be part of this event, and I look forward to sharing and exchanging with everybody. So to start with, if you can see my screen right now, please do open your phone or your computer, go to your browser and put in this Menti code. We would just like to get an overview of who we do have in the room that is joining us this morning or this afternoon. So I can see already there is 40 people in the room, but we need to have an idea where are you joining from and what's your perspective or what's your background in terms of working with standards. So please do open up your browser, go to menti.com and put in the code 5446-4907. Okay, about 8 people seem to have found it so far. When we get that number to 10 or 15, then we can move on. You're most welcome, definitely. And of course, the chat is already open, so feel free to chat, connect with somebody. If you see a familiar name, familiar face, feel free to post something in the chat just to let us know how your experience of the webinar is thus far. Okay, so we do have 15 people that have managed to work through the technology and find the Menti. Thank you very much. So we would like to find out which country, which city are you joining this webinar from? Or that's me. I am joining live from Stockholm here in Sweden. But yeah, please feel free to...
Jag kom precis på det i morse, att det är ju också något som behöver göras.
Yeah, and please do keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking or presenting or asking a question later on. Okay, so we do have Jamaica represented, Cape Town, Zurich. We have Lebanon represented, Maputo, Mozambique represented here today, France, Singapore, London as well, Freiburg, Argentina. Okay, this is quite interesting. We have, yeah, almost all the continents represented here today. I haven't seen somebody from North America yet. So if you are out there, please do represent your continent here. Okay, so this is quite a large spread of people that we do have, but it seems Sweden, Germany, and South Africa have the largest number of participants in the webinar today. Okay, so everybody, you're most welcome, and please keep posting where you're joining the webinar from. And then I would also like to ask you to share a word or two. What is your work? What would you describe your professional role or your work as, just to get a sense of the kind of people that are interested in standards and certification system and resource recovery or recovery of nutrients from sanitation systems. Okay, some academics, recyclers, engineers, researchers, etc. Yeah, please do let us know. WASH advisors and postdoctoral fellows. Okay, interesting. People that work with sustainable food systems. Okay, so some people are putting their professional roles, what do you work as, and some people are mentioning what they work on or what they work with. Okay, both are okay. Or we do also have some people that just do implement. Okay. I wonder whether that's implementing resource recovery or implementing standards, but we'll probably know a little bit later as we interact more in the webinar. So you're almost welcome. Please keep putting a note on what you're working with and where you're coming from. And we shall be gathering that and providing it as input later in the SuSanA forum as an overview of what the session today is about. For those that are just joining right now, I mentioned earlier that my name is Daniel Diba. I work with the Stockholm Environment Institute, and I also serve as a co-lead for Working Group 5 on productive sanitation and recovery of resources from our sanitation systems. The reason that we are having this webinar today is mainly because there is increasing interest globally in recovering resources, nutrients and other resources from waste management systems and sanitation systems. But even with this increasing interest in recovering resources from sanitation systems, there is a question of certain concerns that many of us have about resource recovery. And part of it is with regards to the quality of the products that can be obtained from resource recovery processes. But then also, on the other hand, the issue of the potential impacts on public health. So if we all know that, if you're going to make resources out of excreta, if you're going to make resources out of what we take through our sanitation systems today, there is a wide range of substances, some of which are hazardous or chemicals. One that has been often talked about a lot is heavy metals. But I read recently that, for example, in the European Union, there is over 200,000 chemical substances that are in circulation in the European Union economy, but only about 70 of these are strictly regulated either through bans or through restrictions, and only up to about 220 require any kind of monitoring or tracking. So what happens to all the other hundreds of thousands of chemicals? And this is, of course, an issue that is of concern, that if you're going to recycle nutrients through excreta or other waste streams, how do you manage the recirculation or the thorough through of these different substances in the economy, and what's the impact of these to human health? What if certain substances that have been long banned but are still existing in, waste streams? How do we handle these circulating through the economy? So these are very serious concerns that either could make or break the extent to which we can recover the resources in our sanitation and waste management system. So that's why this webinar has been organized today. We have assembled quite a lineup of speakers and presenters to share with us their experiences of, what certification systems are existing right now, what standards are there. And I guess just like for me, I'm not an expert on this, but hopefully somebody here will also help us know what's the difference between a standard, a certification system, a guideline, a regulation. So there are all these different terms that sometimes are used interchangeably, sometimes they might be confusing, but also what does one cover and what does one not cover? So we are looking forward to discussing these issues in depth. But to begin with, I would like to welcome Anne Paneza to give us just a brief word of welcome from the SuSanA Secretariat, and also tell us what is SuSanA all about and why is SuSanA probably interested in having anything to do with World Toilet Day and certification systems and reuse. Over to you, Anne.
Okay, thank you, Daniel, and really happy to be all with you. And let's say a few words on SuSanA, the Sustainable Sanitation Alliance. SuSanA has been founded in 2017 and now is 15 years old, so it's a youngster, had its wild years, and maybe soon as an adult will have a different legal format or not. It's thriving, and I think what we did over the years is that we really helped to break the taboo around sanitation. In the beginning, we said let's bring up sanitation on the political agenda. I think there as well some progress was made. I think we as well supported with many others. So who is we actually? SuSanA is an informal network and is actually based on the contributions of many. It's hosted at GIZ, the Secretariat, but I think this seminar as well shows how important the different SuSanA individual members and institutional members are to bring things together. And I think we can say that it's, if we want to have a 360-degree sustainability perspective around sanitation, then SuSanA is bringing that together. So as one of the first things, it was to define actually what is sustainable sanitation. Yeah, and so what we said, that what is SuSanA? It's a coordination and discussion platform for a number of publications. We'll see that in a minute. It was a sounding board and still is a sounding board, and tries to bring this to the policy dialogue. It's a working platform. It helps, like in this seminar, to work together to make next steps and find out things. And it promotes knowledge exchange and learning. It has grown. In the first meeting, we were about 20 people from maybe 15 organizations, and now, thanks to the forum, which allows to discuss and where you register, now we're beyond 15,000 forum members, and there are nearly 400 partner organizations. As I said, the 360 degree of sustainability represents the 13 working groups, and this event today is spearheaded by one of the working groups. To be closer to the region, we have started having regional chapters, and I think I said already the discussion forum is a key element as well. At GIZ, there are sort of a number of people, and the interns always bring fresh ideas, what we can do with social media and whatsoever, and we try to be of service for the whole network. It's hosted at a sector program, Water Policy Innovations for Resilience. And here are some of the futures, some of the key tools, and the logic often is that if you do a program, apply for a proposal, maybe you can use some of these tools. You can use systematically the forum, or you can have a thematic discussion, and by this you strengthen. You have a component in your project, and you strengthen a SuSanA as a whole, and that's what we call a cooperation system then. And more and more, some of the of other platforms were thinking, why don't we do this on SuSanA? So on sanitation workers, e-versions of key publications, and now in future maybe as well a network of networks where we try to harmonize the sector again. How is it all going? We are really happy that now we have a elected global steering committee, which is sort of the new governing structure that just happened a couple of weeks before, and it is, I think it will help to what was the core group, and maybe the core group becomes an advisory board more, and steers the secretariat, and the secretariat helps with a number of things that I've just mentioned already in the operational structures. These are some examples of publications. In above, you see sort of the new sanitation workers platform. Before COVID, and let's say hopefully soon, the face-to-face element was a key thing, and we try to bring that on one hand next to meetings where many people are traveling everywhere in different parts of the world, and had the tradition to have one meeting next to the Stockholm Water Week, thanks to the support from SEI and the Stockholm and Swedish side. And I want to highlight that this is Roland Schertenleib. In the first few years, the discussion around the compendium of sanitation systems was one of the key elements of the first maybe 8 meetings. And now a body of work has actually been produced by different actors, often as partner of SuSanA, under the heading of SuSanA. And in the corner up right, we see the one which is the closest to today's topic, the Guide to Sanitation Resource Recovery Products and Technologies. And I think we have a body of work now which has the same definitions and which speaks with one language. And I guess later from Kate, we'll hear a dimension on sanitation safety plans, on tools which we try to harmonize so that the sector is better understood and can speak with one voice. And I think that's it as a very quick introduction to SuSanA, and back to you, Daniel.
Okay, thank you very much, and for this comprehensive introduction to SuSanA and what the network or the alliance does and contributes to the sanitation sector and sustainable development as a whole. So maybe just a quick word. Right now we're going to have some presentations. So our webinar is mainly going to be into sessions. So there's going to be a series of 3 presentations, and then we shall have a panel discussion, both with some prepared questions and then also questions from the audience, both to the speakers and additional panelists that we'll have. But before we do start the presentations, I just want to mention that we do have a Menti poll that is going to be ongoing throughout. Alexandra is going to post the link to this in the chat. So you can use this Menti poll throughout just to take note of what you think you are learning from the discussions, any key insights or takeaways that you have from this webinar. Please feel free to post it on this Menti poll. We'll gather all this feedback together, and we shall compile and post it on the SuSanA forum as sort of proceedings or some sort of takeaways or summary of key takeaways from today's webinar. So please do take advantage of that for making your voice heard and sharing your takeaways from this session. So today we do have 3 very distinguished speakers that are going to be sharing with us from their expertise and experience. From quite different perspectives on standards. So to start with, we shall have Sunil Agarwal, who works with the Toilet Board Coalition based in India. Is going to be sharing with us about a recent standard that they have been developing together with an Indian standards organization, PMO, for compost from fecal sludge systems. We also have Daniela Peguero from ETH Zurich, the Sustainable Food Processing Lab, who is going to be speaking to us about the state of the art of standards and certification systems regarding black soldier fly larvae. This is probably one of the most exciting things that is happening in sanitation and waste management systems currently, with growing interest in black soldier fly larvae processing and all the different products that can come from that. So what standards are being used for these products? What certification systems? We have Daniela today with us to share with us from that exciting scene. And then lastly, we are going to have Kate Medlicott from the WASH unit of the WHO, who is going to be sharing with us about the work that WHO is doing to ensure that we do our resource recovery in a safe way, in a way that safeguards public health, and also will be sharing with us some of the tools that WHO has developed. The guidelines from 2006 on safe reuse of excreta and other wastewater streams. So she'll be sharing with us what has been happening with that process and how have those guidelines been used and what updates have happened in that scene from the work of WHO. So you're all most welcome, and I will hand over the microphone to Sunil to start us off. Over to you, Sunil.
Thank you, Daniel. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining the session. And first of all, I want to say thank you to SuSanA and SEI for giving us an opportunity to present our work. So I'm not sure how many people are aware about the Toilet Board Coalition's work. So in a nutshell, if I have to say, what Toilet Board Coalition does is to help the sanitation sector by bringing in private sector solutions for accelerating the pace of implementation of the solutions to be able to achieve SDG 6.2 by 2030. We run the world's only accelerator program in sanitation, wherein we work with entrepreneurs who have developed innovative solutions in the sanitation sector, whether it is provision of access to toilets, whether it is public toilets, community toilets, or the treatment of the waste that gets generated, also using robotics or satellite imagery technology that helps and aids in terms of ensuring that safely managed sanitation is accessible universally. Now, having worked with the entrepreneurs over the last 7 years, we accelerated 61 accelerators so far, belonging to more than 20 countries over the last 6-7 years. And one of the things that we realized working with the entrepreneurs, particularly those working in the treatment sector, that they do not know what to do with the solids that get generated at the fecal sludge treatment plant, that is the FSTP or the STP. Now, currently, if you take the case of India, the Central Pollution Control Board, which is actually the regulatory body on behalf of the federal government of India, they have prescribed certain standards for treatment of water before it is released back into the environment. However, there are no standards that are available for solids or the products derived from the treatment of fecal sludge. Now, if you look at India with 1.2 billion people, we create roughly around 1.75 million tons of fecal sludge every single day. Now, if you look at that quantity and there are no standards in terms of what do you do with the product, then it becomes a challenge. So something needs to be done. Now, why it is of interest to Toilet Board Coalition, it should be done by somebody else. It doesn't come into our mandate. But our mandate comes into the idea that we need to help our entrepreneurs to unlock the revenue streams so that their businesses become economically sustainable and viable and are also replicable and be scaled. Now, with that background, we needed to do something about it. So we talked to various organizations that have been working in the sector, and most of the times what we heard was if you look at an FSTP, you get a fecal sludge of roughly around 3 to 5% of the capacity. It's very minuscule. It does not make any economic sense. Now, if you take a 10 KLD plant, which is treating 10,000 liters of fecal sludge every single day, and if you take 5% as the fecal sludge, that is 500 kilograms, roughly around 1,000 pounds per day. Now, if you multiply it for 30 days, it's a big number, right? So you need to address it, because if you do not, what currently happens in the country is the treatment plant owners, because there is no stipulation or regulation in terms of what do they do with the solids, they dry it out in the sun, and periodically they give it away to the farmers which are close by, or the farmer themselves come there and pick it up. Now, whether the government likes it or not, whether there is regulation or not, this is currently being used by the farmers in their respective fields. Now, that is much more dangerous, because you do not know what is going into, what kind of feedstock is going into those plants or those agricultural fields. So that becomes a challenge. Now, in order for you to be able to formalize the whole process, you need to have a common language that you can talk about the fecal sludge that is available in country A or city A in a country is as good as or better than the fecal sludge treated compost that is in city B. But if there are no standards, how do you compare them? How do you ensure that there are no pathogens? How do you ensure that they are treated? How do you ensure that they are tested? Because one of the other challenge that we have in India currently is it costs a lot of money to test the fecal sludge derived compost, roughly around 32,000 rupees per sample, which is roughly around $400. And that's a lot of money for a sample, which means you need to be able to make that kind of money by selling it to be able to spend that much for testing. So keeping all these things in mind, we brought together a US-based organization called IAPMO, which is the standards organization. And we brought in academicians who have been working in this sector on fecal sludge treatment. Then we brought in our entrepreneurs who have been working on the field. So we put together a committee of like-minded people representing the small and medium entrepreneurs, academicians, and standards organization. And then we try to address the problem. Now, the question in front of us was, how do you look at the input? Because the quality of the sludge that you get from a sewage treatment plant is different from the quality of sludge that you get from a FSTP, because FSTP has slightly concentrated fecal sludge as compared to an STP. And then STP would also have a lot of contamination because it carries through the stormwater drains and the roadside runaway water and everything else that brings in. And also the concentration of fecal sludge is lesser in STP. So having looked at these, what we realized is irrespective of the source, where it is coming from, the final product needs to be looked at. We do not want to get into whether it is using thermal technology for treatment, whether it is using nature-based kind of technology, irrespective of the technology, irrespective of the feedstock, whether it is STP or FSTP, as long as the input that goes into the making of these compost, if 75% and above is fecal sludge, then it needs to adhere to the standards that we have developed. Now, this was discussed, debated internally, because if you look at it, like for example, right now I have in front of me a sample that was given to me by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs on the World Toilet Day. Now, this sample is of the compost derived from a fecal sludge treatment plant. But interestingly, this is given to me or to every participant there. Obviously, we are going to use it in our pots or something. But the government currently does not have standards. If this needs to be scaled, if this needs to be legalized and formally used as a business opportunity, this needs to be standardized. This needs to be certified. But there is no conversation. In India, currently, we do have something called as fertilizer control order, which prescribes the norms for compost derived from treating the organic waste from households. But there are no standards for compost derived from treatment of fecal sludge. And that is precisely the reason that we said, if we want to ensure that our entrepreneurs who are working in this sector, they need to look at a viable business opportunity, we need to have these standards. And that is precisely the reason why we came up with these standards. Now, for these standards, we did look at what is already available in the sector, whether it is Bloom soil or DC water based out of Washington, DC, whether it is the fertilizer control order of the government of India, whether it is the other standards provided by other agencies, and then basis which we developed our own standard that you see on the screen right now. And we also said that let us start using it for non-food applications to begin with. Because if you look at the global south, there are still questions and challenges when it comes to acceptability of food that has fecal sludge as one of the component of, like, let's say compost. So in order to address this inhibition, we said, let's start using it for non-food applications. Let us see what kind of response we get. What we also did was in the standards, we also looked at the safety and precautions that are needed for handlers of these compost. Then the other question that we were debating was, should we call it a fertilizer? Because fertilizer in itself has to undergo a lot of regulatory mechanisms within the government. So should we call it a fertilizer or should we call it a soil enhancer? Because at the least, what the compost derived from fecal sludge would do, if it does not improve the quality of your output, it definitely helps in ensuring that the top soil layer is replenished properly. What we have done is, after developing these standards, we got 3 samples from 3 different areas going through 3 different treatment processes. And we saw that all the 3 samples fall into the standard ranges that have been given for various parameters, barring one thing, which was deficient in potassium. But probably that is something which we could look at. So based on this, we said, let's use this. And now what we plan to do is we would be coming up with a white paper where this compost would be used on agricultural produce, which is definitely not food applications. It could be urban forestry, it could be nurseries, it could be landscaping. Then see how the soil composition changes, document it scientifically, then present it to the government. In the meanwhile, what we are also doing is having conversations with a fertilizer company to see if there could be a commercial offtake agreement between an FSTP operator and a fertilizer company, so that they could look at, because at this point of time, an FSTP operator does not have the expertise and does not want to get into selling the compost or testing the compost. Now, if there is an aggregator like a fertilizer company, because they already have the supply chains to the farmer that they are going to reach out, if we can depend on them or if we can piggyback on them, then we get these fertilizer company guys could pick up the samples, ensure that it falls. If it is not adhering to the standards, then whatever needs to be done in terms of enhancing the quality, whether it is nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, if some of these is missing, that could be adhered and then tested, then certified, and then it could be bagged and sold it in the market. Now, while it addresses the climate change mitigation challenges, in the long run, it would also create livelihood opportunities for the people involved in the entire supply chain. So that is the background. And the first step towards that is having this standard. We are hoping that we would next year would come up with some challenges to see how the cost for testing these standards could be brought down by an open challenge that we come up with the innovators, and see how we can take it forward. So that whole sector could also be invigorated to get into creating opportunities for people to get into this sector. So with that, I close my remarks here and would be happy to take any questions eventually. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sunil, for that very interesting overview, both of the process that you have undertaken together with your different partners to develop this standard, but also the vision that you have for taking it forward and its uptake amongst a wide range of stakeholders. I would like to request everyone that does have questions, please do keep tabs on those questions. We are going to have an extended discussion later where you'll be able to ask your questions. So next, we're going to have Daniela Peguero from the ETH Zurich, the Sustainable Food Processing Lab, to share with us, about standards and certification systems for black soldier fly larvae and the products thereof. Welcome.
Thank you.
And maybe just to mention, that maybe those that looked at the program earlier. So Maurice Gold was going to give this presentation, but he's not able to be with us. So Daniela graciously agreed to stand in on behalf of Maurice, and of course they work with the same team. So just to note the change in the agenda. Yeah, thank you very much.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Daniel, for that introduction, and of course for the invitation to speak here today. So as mentioned, I'll be speaking on standards and certifications of products from black soldier fly biowaste processing. And just in case for some of those who are maybe not familiar with black soldier fly larvae, they are considered an emerging waste treatment technology that can be grown on different types of organic waste materials and byproducts such as food waste or animal manure. And then they can convert this organic waste material into a larval biomass, as well as they leave behind this compost-like residue that can have kind of fertilizer applications. So as I mentioned, one of the reasons why they've generated so much interest over the last couple decades is because of their ability to convert these organic waste materials into a highly nutritious insect biomass that can then be used for animal feed due to their high protein and high fat content. And so currently they can be used as feeds for pig and poultry, as well as for pet food and fish. They can be used in different forms, such as you can feed them live or you can feed them dried. They can also be defatted and then converted into a protein meal that can then be formulated with other animal feeds. But then there's also some other end products that people are currently investigating, such as chitin and melanin use, as well as looking at using their fats and lipids for biofuel production. So that research is currently underway in regards to those applications. And then the other application, of course, is that they leave behind kind of this residue. You could call it fly larvae poop, as it's a mixture of the leftover waste with their excreta. And this can be kind of used for compost or fertilizer. And this can come in different forms as well, whether it be pelletized or used as in pyrolysis, can be burned or used for biogas production. However, it's important to note that at least within the EU, it is considered an animal byproduct. And because of that, it's treated as such. So then in the EU, you would have to heat treat it at 70 degrees Celsius for 1 hour. And so now I'll kind of give more of a focus on the specific legislation with larval products. I'm giving examples from Europe, East Africa, and Asia. So within the EU, it has probably the most complete legislation, which is harmonized across the 27 member states. But with that being said, it's also the strictest regulation because within the EU, the larvae are considered farmed animals. And because of that, they can only be fed feed that you would already use for farmed animals. So for example, it cannot be any organic waste material that's non-traceable. So you wouldn't be able to use restaurant food waste or anything post-consumer food waste, but it needs to be a traceable byproduct. For example, brewer spent grain, where you would be able to trace back the batch of which that spent grain came from. Additionally, you can't have any meat or fish involved in this. So even if it's pre-consumer waste, they don't allow any kind of animal product inside. And then you also cannot use any animal manure or fecal sludge or human manure or food or canteen waste. But there is an advocacy group. It's called IPIF, so the International Platform of Insects for Food and Feed. And they are kind of the group that really promotes the interest from the insect production sector and discuss with the EU policymakers. So some other limits that are within the EU is basically which kind of animals can consume insect-based products. So as you can see from in 2001, insect protein was completely banned, but recently in 2017, they allowed it for aquaculture. It's been allowed for pets, whether it's furry or non-furry animals. And then for recently with livestock, it's been allowed for pigs and poultry. And so as you can see, this is just new as of 2021. And so this just goes to show how the legislation and regulations are still currently adapting as more and more research kind of comes out to really highlight the benefits. So when considering kind of certifications, there's one large animal feed certification called the Good Manufacturing Practice Plus, and they have now also included insects in there for animal feed. However, this is based on EU regulation when considering wanting to try to get this type of certification. Now within Africa, the regulations are currently underway. So some examples of where regulations are starting to kind of evolve are within Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Malawi. The National Bureaus of Standard in Uganda and Kenya have already issued specific standards regarding the nutritional composition of the product, so specifying exactly what the nutritional composition is, and then also ensuring that all microbial, so ensuring that the pathogen limits stay below, as well as heavy metals and aflatoxins. But what's great here is that there's no limitation on the feedstock choice. However, that is only for the local markets, but you would be able to grow the larvae, for example, on any type of animal manure or human feces, in addition to fecal sludge. Just to give kind of an example, though, it's, for example, in Kenya specifically, the regulation isn't just within the insect product specifically, but also along the whole insect production chain. So for example, if you wanted to collect the insects from the wild, you would need a permit for this. Also, if you're thinking about, maybe using the waste, you'd have to get a license for the waste management, food safety and hygiene, and different declaration and marketing processes. And there's different stakeholders involved throughout the entire process. So for example, when considering using the insects from the wild, working with the Department of Environment, but then for the marketing, Department of Trade. So it's important to consider that it requires a lot of coordination from different national stakeholders. And one of also the advocacy groups that are involved is ICIPE. They're headquartered in Kenya. And so this is the International Center for Insect Physiology and Ecology. And currently in Asia, there's not as much legislation, and so, or not as much information currently available in terms of the legislation. However, the hurdles in terms of using pre and post consumer food waste is a lot lower. You are able to use this as well as wastewater sludge. However, one of the big hurdles is that there are several large companies that want to be able to sell within the EU market. And so because of that, they have to base or produce based on the EU standards. Singapore specifically has recently worked on developing their own legislation. So for example, food waste is allowed. However, manure and materials of ruminant origin are not allowed. So although there's still not as much legislation, you can see that kind of some countries are starting to come out with their own set of standards. So kind of in summary there, with black soldier fly larvae, you can of course have these two huge end products. So one is of course the larval based products that can be converted in animal feed. And then you also have the frass or the larvae poop, which can be used for compost or fertilizer application. However, for the frass, you do have some standards or certifications that may exist. But as you can see with the insect sector, it's very still new in terms of its development. So there's not this kind of global animal feed standards that already exist, such as the World Organization for Animal Health. But instead, the insect-specific legislation is really kind of varying globally and still very much underway. And so even within the EU, for example, The use of live insects versus dried insects depends on the country. And so you see that it's really depending country specific, but then also region specific. And it's important to note that with larvae growing them on different organic waste streams, the product safety is also kind of another important factor to consider. So ensuring that you either do heat treatment to reduce pathogens, and then of course doing a product safety analysis to ensure that you are below with the heavy metals limits. So that was a presentation on black soldier fly larvae, and I'm happy to take questions later.
Wow. Thank you very much, Daniela, for this very comprehensive overview. You've taken us on a tour of the world and what is happening on different continents and countries with regards to regulations, standards, and certifications for black soldier fly. I have lots of questions, but they will, of course, be discussed in the discussion session, and I hope there are probably many other questions from other participants as well. Okay, so thank you once again. And lastly, we are going to have a presentation from Kate Medlicott from the World Health Organization. Kate,
hi,
the floor
thank you. You can see
is
me.
yours.
I'll just share my screen.
Yes.
Okay, hopefully you can see
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me today. I'm going to take a slightly broader view, I think, and that's how this works. And just kind of talk you through where WHO is coming from in terms of the getting to safely managed and regulated sanitation services, so all the way from the toilet right through to the end use and disposal step, and some of these emerging technologies, and particularly in the context of World Toilet Day, this countdown to 2030. It's pretty clear we're alarmingly off track to meet our promise for 2030, and give you a bit of information about what we are doing in terms of the regulatory side, as well as implementation packages for that whole chain. So firstly, just to say, WHO is a normative organization that provides science-based guidance that are based on public health protection, but secondarily, of course, looking at how we can maximize wider social and economic benefits. And these are the two main points of departure. The safe use of wastewater guidelines now are really rather old and out of date in places. And we also have the more general but more up-to-date guidelines on sanitation and health. I think where we sort of should first start, we have a thing called RegNet, which is a network we pull together of regulators all around the world in drinking water and sanitation services, and we're really trying to bring in more regulators covering aspects of the sanitation service chain. And kind of what you see here, of course, is there's a whole pile of different regulatory mechanisms we can be looking at, whether that's from the toilet end of planning and building regulations all the way through to the standards for various types of reuse that we've been talking about. And this is no surprise, the two previous presenters have talked about it a lot. Not only is there kind of a lack of these standards, but more fundamentally, in many cases, there's big sort of gaps and overlaps in the mandates, particularly gaps for sanitation, I would say, for many of these areas. So, I mean, a key thing first is just to identify which is the body in any given country that has responsibility for providing regulation and standards for these type of things, and then by extension, what are the accountability mechanisms they have between the regulator and the service provider who's developing and producing these types of products. So there's a long way to go there, I would say, unfortunately, although there are countries that are doing really well, and I think Daniela spoke to some of those. And we've recently published a blog which for World Toilet Day, talking about kind of an emerging roadmap for countries to progress from basically being a kind of Wild West unregulated environment towards a regulated environment with clear accountability mechanisms. Also on World Toilet Day, we published an updated version of the Sanitation Safety Planning Manual. The three main changes in there is that we've tried to simplify it a little bit. We've oriented it more towards the updated sanitation and health guidelines, and we've incorporated a whole lot of things related to managing risks associated with climate change. I don't think I need to kind of tell all of you all of this, because I think many will know it already, but essentially it's looking at that implementation part. So having standards and guidelines is one thing, but we need risk management approaches to make sure that they are met and consistently met, and that there's a process by which that can be demonstrated to an external authority, such as a regulator or auditor. Yep, so sanitation safety planning is a step-by-step risk-based approach. It looks at identifying and prioritizing the highest health risks along a sanitation chain, which may be within the business model of an organization that's making products out of wastewater and sludge, or across a whole municipality. But the main thing is it's designed to guide efforts where it's going to have the most impact for health, and coordinate the actions along that kind of that chain, whether it's within the context of a business or a whole city. So, okay, I think you know these reasonably well, perhaps as well, but it's a typical hazard and critical control point approach. So we start by describing the system, identifying hazardous events and the existing control measures, how well they're working, and then working on an incremental improvement plan to control the risks that are not currently under control. And then making sure we've got a monitoring plan that not just looks at kind of outcome measures like microbial quality, for example, but also process measures along the way. And then also building in kind of supporting programs, which might be things like training for staff, standard operating procedures, and so forth. So that's kind of SSP in a nutshell. There's the steps, the tools, and worked examples that go with it. Again, we're looking at these sort of typical risks along a sanitation chain or within the business model of a reuse entity. And I won't kind of read all these out, but because I think it's probably well known. But of course, we have sort of typical risks, and this is the basic elements of an SSP. We look at the risks, then we look at the control measures at each step. So understanding that control measures can be kind of behavioral things. They can be the way the system is designed. It can be the way that the system is managed, and there might be kind of regulatory controls as well. So we need to think about not just kind of technical controls, but controls in this broader sense. And then monitoring associated with each of those. So that would be operational monitoring, like is the system operating as it's intended to, and verification monitoring, which is more like, are we getting the outcome we're expecting? So, for example, the quality of the end product. Yeah, so we can, the SSP process would take you systematically along each step. So in this case, from toilet to containment, to conveyance and treatment and reuse. I just wanted to say quickly, for like small localized systems, you probably don't need such to sort of crack this nut with such a big hammer. And we do have sanitary inspection forms for the toilet and containment part, as well as a digitized version of that, which is a simplified version of risk assessment at toilet and containment step. Yeah, then moving to conveyance, of course, there's things we need to be thinking about, especially for workers, and monitoring also related to that. And then treatment, in use and disposal. These are the types of things that were discussed by the previous speakers as well. So it just kind of brings all of these things into a comprehensive and coordinated package. But maybe what you might be more interested in before I wrap up is, yeah, I mentioned there's a sort of a few things that either out there or that you can dig into or are in the pipeline. The first I mentioned is our regulators network and this emerging roadmap. I think this is one of the most critical things we can be working on is figuring out and encouraging countries to take up this, to sort out responsibilities and mandates for and the accountability mechanisms for regulating for the whole chain, including this reuse step, which is perhaps one of the most forgotten ones. So that's something we'll be really focusing on, and I hope it's something for all of you to be thinking about, how you're interacting with your various stakeholders on that. We also just produced what we call an open WHO course, which is a sort of introductory level course describing, what is or why do we need to accelerate on sanitation, what is safely managed sanitation, what are the definitions for it, how do we go about embedding those in national systems, and some tools and approaches for that. The SSP manual that I just described now has a detailed learning hub, so you can go to that link and download videos for each of the modules, as well as PowerPoint slides and the trainer's pack. If you would like to deliver SSP training where you are, or do self-learning. There's also, I probably should have done more on this, but time is not enough. There's lots of kind of emerging examples of these type of risk-based approaches, whether they're called SSP or some other kind of risk-based approach. There's a new legislation and guidance in the European Union. The EMRO, we call it, or MENA region has got some really great examples emerging out of particularly Israel, Jordan, and so forth, Iran, and Latin America are really pushing ahead, largely in sewage systems, and likewise the regulators associations of Eastern and Southern Africa, and also Latin America. That's SOAS and ADIRASA are really kind of taking up these approaches, which is great. I think some of the presenters sort of mentioned, willingness to pay and how does this model work. To my mind, some of the best work done on business models is coming out of the CIGAR group on resource recovery and reuse. So I would encourage you to go there on business models. And then finally, just what's in the pipeline for us. We are working on a guidance document on how to set national standards for wastewater and sludge treatment, including treatment sort of fit for next use. So that's under development. I think that will be a rather challenging task. And I do get a lot of queries like, oh, we really need those 2006 guidelines updated. And yes, that's definitely true. Unfortunately, we have no kind of immediate plan to be doing that, but it's well heard. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, wow, awesome. Thank you very much, Kate, for this presentation and this overview of what WHO is doing. I would like to add my voice to those that are saying, yes, the 2006 guidelines should be updated. Maybe if enough of us give it an upvote, then probably it will move higher up the agenda on the priority list. Of course, I know there's lots of other things that your team is working on. Okay, this is very interesting. So right now we are going to go into a series of Q&A, question and answer. And of course, we are going to have all the speakers that have presented today. And I would like to ask all of them to put their cameras on if they can. But in addition to Kate, Daniela, and Sunil, who have presented earlier, they're also being joined by Mei Shan from TUVSUD, that's Standards and Certifications body that is represented in several countries, both Germany and in Singapore as well. And Nelson Ekane, who is a colleague of mine here at the Stockholm Environment Institute, who have also worked to varying extents on standards and certification systems and resource recovery, and they will also be responding to some questions. So you're all most welcome. I will have a couple of questions to kickstart off this session. But then for the rest of the participants, if you have some questions that came up during the presentations that you would like to address either to one of the speakers or indeed any of the other panelists, you're most welcome to post it in the chat. And I have my colleagues, Alexandra and others, that will be looking through to sort through comments and questions so that we can direct those questions to our panelists. But yeah, maybe to start off, first of all, thank you all for being part of this panel discussion. And to start off, I would like just to ask a more general question. What do you all think can be done? Because so far we've seen from this presentation, there's lots of things that are being done from what Sunil shared on the standard that is being developed in India. And of course, that's just an example. There's many more in that part of the world that are being done. And then standards, certifications and regulations for black soldier fly larvae products. And then what has also been shared from, the work that WHO is doing with a wide number of regulators and standards bodies to work on, the entire sanitation chain. What do you all think can be done more to enable the utilization of these standards and these certification systems, especially as far as resource recovery is concerned, or promoting, safe reuse of nutrients from sanitation and waste management systems? What needs to be done? Because there's all these standards and certifications. What needs to be done to make sure people are aware of them and to make sure that different stakeholders, whether it's, businesses, whether it's public agencies, or it's different stakeholders from the civil society sector, that they're aware of these existing regulations, standards, and certification systems, and that they can use them, to further enhance their work on resource recovery. Anybody wants to have a first go at that?
Hi, maybe I'll start since I'm coming from the TIC industry, the testing, inspection, and certification. I think this is the bread and butter of my company business. So I think what can to increase the utilization of any standards, especially if it's on a international, so an ISO or ASTM, more globally accepted standards. I think the country adoption is primary. So once a country is willing to adopt them, and then whether they make it voluntary, or because standards is always voluntary until they make it into regulation. So unless it becomes a regulation, there's hardly any push factor for people who are using the resources, reuse resources to go for any form of testing or certification. Sunil mentioned before, it costs a lot to do a sample testing. So from my perspective, I think country adoption needs to happen first, and then to make it into regulation to really push for that. Yeah. And please add on, to what I just said. Thanks.
I agree.
Maybe I could.
Go ahead. Okay.
Kate, you can go first, and then Sunil.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you used the key word, Daniel, which was about enabling, and particularly around the regulation. I think sometimes, regulating is not an easy job, and I think sometimes it can be kind of a disabling thing for actors who are wanting to work in this space. And so I think we have to be really encouraging regulation that really enables good actors. I mean, sometimes there's a big cost of doing things well, right? So you don't want to be setting up kind of difficult regulatory environments that make it difficult for good actors and actually kind of ignore lots of people are doing things in the informal sector, and it's actually much worse. So I think that's just going with this very enabling mindset. And I think also, I think there's a lot of women, we're dealing with this as we speak on chemicals like PFOS and PFOA, which you might be seeing in the news, right? There's an awful lot of like attention that comes to some quite scary things, and sometimes that comes at the expense of more basic, simple things. So I would also be kind of encouraging the regulation to sort of start around areas that are the most important of the greatest health risk, and not get too distracted or constraining around, big, scary sounding things, which may not be such a big issue. And then the third thing I would say is just around coordination with others. It's great if we've got standards and regulations for, say, reuse, but if it's not coordinated with the other bits of standards and regulations that are happening in the food industry or further upstream with the treatment, or then that kind of piece of standard and regulation is kind of in isolation and maybe in conflict with other bits of legislation and regulation out there. That's all.
Interesting. So Sunil and then Nelson.
Sure. So I agree with both May and Kate, because regulation plays an important game here, because it is the responsibility of the state to ensure people have access to safely managed sanitation for all. Now, if the state, like if you take the case of India, the sanitation became a mainstream conversation with the current Prime Minister bringing it to the table, and people are talking. And with hundreds of, millions of toilets that have been built in the last 7 years, we have taken care of access. But now the biggest challenge in front of the current government is, how do you ensure that whatever waste that gets generated is safely treated? And that has a lot of implications. If the government plays the role of a regulator and the monitoring agency and allow the private sector to work and identify business models to take care of it, then I think everybody would have a role to play. And then if everyone plays the role, then it helps us in reaching there. Now, the example that I talked about, this particular sample that was given to us, whether we like it or not, without the regulation, still people are using it, the farmers are using it. But if you have the regulation, testing would happen to ensure that no pathogens, no heavy metals are going into the food chain. So it's easier, and definitely it would be sane to do it in a regulated manner to ensure better safe than be sorry about it. So I think regulation plays an important role here.
Interesting on making the connection between standards and regulations. And I'm thinking this is, of course, something that we would want more clarification on. Where does the word regulation begin and end, and where does standards begin and end, and certification? Which one is voluntary? Which one is involuntary? Which one is, government mandated, and which one is not? So probably, yeah, it would be good also to throw a bit of more light on that. But yeah, first, Nelson, could you say something? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting discussion. Yeah, ensuing. Yeah, I think my take here would be that small steps would be good to make. Now, the waste management sector maybe it's not as simple as other sectors where you've had transitions happening, and we often make that comparison. Institutions change with time, and I think what we are talking here about all this, what is allowed, and how we actually enforce it or monitor is part and parcel of how we follow up institutions in society. And those things usually happen with time. And two things here which we should note is, one thing is to get rid of human waste or wastewater and all those things, to treat and confine them for health purposes. Another thing is to treat them for reuse. So that distinction has to be made. And there, you can also have, a public debate about, what are the risks and benefits of reusing. And that's where the problem is actually comes in, at least for the case of Sweden, where there is a tension between those two, goals for dealing with human wastes and wastewater and so on. So I think, of course, we've seen progress, within this sector, but I think collaboration, of course, has been mentioned, a dialogue between the two, people that are, pro sludge and those that are against it needs to be made. So we need to agree on certain things, and on those things that we agree on, standards definitely would be made. And I think small steps definitely should be what we should expect. So we can't, leapfrog so fast. I mean, government needs to. There's a responsibility also that comes in from a government point of view to maintain a safe society. And with all these new substances that Kate mentioned that are, in the media every day, and there's a lot of alarm, it's a lot of amplification. So that actually is something that the government has to make sure that they don't take decisions that would, harm, society in the long run. So it is a very sensitive and complex issue that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Nelson. Daniela, yes,
I just want to add a small part. Yes, just want to add a small part to that as well. I agree with everything that has been said. I think, with regulations, it's important in order to, of course, in terms of at least with black soldier fly larvae, you are having a marketable product that will then go into the food chain system, right? So ensuring, of course, that products are safe. But I think also sometimes what you can see, as I was mentioning earlier, within, at least having some of these more strict regulations creates also then hurdles, right? And so I think it's always important to think about, how also just research or, institutions play a role in this. These advocacy groups, I mentioned ICP in Kenya, and then obviously IPIF in Europe, and also there's one organization in Asia as well, and just kind of showcasing and finding out more whether or not how we can really make these products safe, right? Even growing them on human feces. I mean, you can make this product safe, but what is needed in order to do that? So I think it's just important that regulations are there, but also that we really, that how maybe having such strict regulations can also harm as well your idea to be able to reuse these different types of waste streams.
This is a very interesting point you make, Danielle, and I think it's also somewhat aligns with a comment I've seen in the chat from Per Drexel about it's okay to have standards and regulations, but then the important thing also is the ability of institutions to achieve, monitor or enforce this. And I think just sort of making a jump from this very point, May, I know that you've been involved and in part of leading the work that led to ISO 30500, which is a new standard dealing with non-sewered sanitation systems. And I'm wondering, could you tell us a little bit more about, does this standard also deal with the resource recovery aspects? And from your experience, how has it been received and how is it being used, particularly if at all there is any parts of it that relate to, recovery of resources from non-sewered sanitation systems?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I've been involved with the development of two ISO standards related to the NSSS. One is a ISO 30500, which is the performance for the on-site non-sewage sanitation system, something you can think of like a, it's an individual unit, and you can certify it to the front end or back end. The other standard is the 31800, ISO 31800, and that one is more related to resource recovery. That definitely touch more on resource recovery. The 31800 is specifically for FSTP.
Okay.
So because the 30500 is mostly for home use, you don't generate that much enough to make it into a business case for someone to come along and want to, reuse as a fertilizer or sell it. It's just not enough. But if I talk about the ISO 31800 on the resource recovery for FSTP, then it's different, right? So it's on a large, big scale. And the standard doesn't address, besides the set requirements for the effluents and the solids in terms of protozoa and helminth egg and some pathogen kill. They don't, that standard doesn't mandate or have any requirements on the quality or the value of the reuse of the resource recovered. They leave it's outside the scope of the standard. They leave it to specific country for application for use. For example, if the resource recovered from the FSTP is fertilizers, and then depending on where it's being sold, then it should follow the local regulations for bio fertilizers. So that's why the standard doesn't cover any requirements on the quality for the reuse. And the same for effluent, right? So if one of the products that come out from the FSTP is for fertilizers to be used on the land, again, depending on which country is being used, the standard states that you have to follow the local regulation or the best practice guideline if there's one out there that's widely accepted. So but then can I share screen? I did look at I did a bit of research, and I did find there are some standards out there. Can you see it?
Okay. Yes, that's okay.
That some of them are dealing with recovered resource. So for example, for biosolids, sludge recovery, recycling, treatment and disposal, beneficial of biosolids and land application. So I didn't look into that standard, but I suspect some of the standards here will talk about what are the requirements that if you're going to use it as for land application, for application use, what are some of the requirements you need to adhere to? Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's some of the standards that's currently still being developed, and they do look at what type of treatment technology is being used. For example, if you're using a thermal technology for sludge recovery, most of the time you're probably just going to get ash back, right? And then depending on what you use, maybe it's gasification, pyrolysis, they may produce, or boiler, they may produce vapor, which you can condense it, and your reused product could be potable water. It really depends. So then, some of the standards may look at, depending on what kind of technology you use, and most likely you can, the product that come out of it, they might state the application requirements. So
this is a very interesting overview, May, and yeah, it would be good if you can share this, and yeah, we can also share it with others on the SuSanA forum, since it gives a very good overview of standards from the ISO universe, as I might call it, with regards to resource recovery. Okay, Alexandra, do you have any question from the chat that we can?
I will just quickly take over. My name is Teresa. So I have the first question is for Kate, which is, what are the main issues with the 2006 guidelines according to you? For example, what do you consider the most outdated?
Okay, good question. Well, I mean, broadly speaking, I think one of the biggest issues is they're just really hard to read and navigate. I had spent the first kind of few months of my job trying to get my head around those, and honestly, if I wasn't being paid to do it, I might have given up. So we definitely need to make them more user-friendly, is one thing. And then I think that just all the stuff around the microbiology, the treatment processes, you know, there's a lot of new data on that. So yeah, it's around, I think, usability and then the scientific underpinning, and then particularly how that kind of translates into functional business models. I don't think we would go in depth on business models, but we do need to look at how this interfaces better with the implementation environment. Those guidelines have a lot of good technical information in them, but when it gets to like, how do I actually do this in practice, it's quite hard to glean that out of them. At least I find that, and would be very welcome to take you know, broader feedback on what you think would make them more useful.
Interesting. Thank you, Kate. Any other question, Teresa?
Yes, thank you very much, Kate. The other 3 questions that I've collected are not directed at anyone specific, so I'll just ask into the plenum. Second is, do you have any recent examples in nutrient management valuation in tropical nations, for example, Latin American and the Caribbean?
Anybody from the panel that wants to take a stab at that question? Okay, maybe it seems a bit maybe specific.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe somebody in the audience has insight into that particular question. It's about nutrient management valuation with specific reference to Latin American and Caribbean. So probably if somebody in the audience has an insight into that, you could type something in the chat. But we could respond to another question in the meantime.
Okay, the next one is also quite specific, so maybe I'll ask the most general one that I can see, which is this tension concerning the safe reuse of treated wastewater and sludge is a real challenge, especially when now looking at these contaminants of emerging concern. So how can we continue to promote wastewater reuse with a strong pushback, sometimes from health authorities, general public, etc.?
Okay, Nelson, maybe you want to
that's a very good question, and I think that pertains particularly to the Swedish, sludge debate, which is something that we are following closely at SEI. It is a concern from a risk governance point of view. Definitely, but shouldn't actually stop us, to continue the work we are doing. But I think we should actually be able to engage in a debate that constructively with those who are against the use of sludge. We should be able to ascertain what actually we have control over. What are the things that we know today? What are the things that we can control when it comes to risks? Of course, the benefits are plausible. I don't think we need to justify that anymore. But I think what we need to be more particular about the risks. To what extent can we control the risks that exist today and the risks that potentially would happen in the future, given that some of the things that are in sludge are things that we don't know how they will play long term. So I think we need to be able to engage with it in a dialogue and agree on certain things. And of course, we can disagree on certain points. And then, of course, we work towards addressing those issues that we don't agree on. But definitely, we need more research in actually measuring these substances that we don't actually measure today. There are a lot of these substances. There are thousands of them that we introduce into the system. And one thing that Sweden is doing, of course, is source separation, trying to get rid of things that should not end up in the system itself. And I think Sweden and the REVAC system is one of those, certification systems that actually is doing a very good job in that. But I think a dialogue constructive is the way to go in addressing this, both the risks that we have today and the risks that we potentially will have tomorrow.
Maybe I could just add, I find the framing, should we promote reuse or not, a little bit strange, because in some ways it's all going somewhere, it's all ending up somewhere, right? It's just whether we call it reuse or not. And so the kind of question is more like, what kind of uses are we okay with and how do we make them safer? And I think the whole circular economy discussion is kind of opening up more space for that. But if there's this kind of thing that, oh, we can't reuse, it's, to me, it's not really reflective of what's actually happening out there and kind of the material flows of these waste products and everything that's contained in them. So yeah, sorry, that's just a half thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point to make, Kate, and I like that. But I think the issue is the nature of the substance and what it contains. That is the problem, actually. And if we can reduce the things that get in there from the source, I think that's what we have good examples in Sweden doing that. So when in fact the stigma itself is one of the aspects which has suddenly become so important for humans as we evolve. It wasn't the case in the past, but then there are also actual risks as a result of the chemicals that find themselves in sludge, which we need to manage, and that makes it a little bit complex. We should be able to navigate through that complexity.
Yeah, very interesting, and I think, of course, that makes these standards and certifications and regulations all the more important, because I guess the big question is about having more transparency about what is in there, so that the risks can be better managed. Okay, I see there are a couple of hands up. Teresa, are those questions, or are we taking one or two from the chat? Maybe we have chance for just one more question, and then we close.
Yes, I'm not sure if the hands that are raised for questions. I don't know. Maybe sure. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, yes. Pierre, can you ask your question, please? Yeah.
Yes, it's not a question, but I would like to thank you. Thank you very much, all the panelists, for the subject they developed. And for us in Burundi, I'm TC Secretary of the Standard of Wastewater in Burundi, and I'm working in the Burundi Bureau of Standards, and I'm working in standard development. It's very good for us that you share the other standard, perhaps for example the ISO standard, because we are developing the system and the standard and the regulations in our country. My wish is a collab, as someone told us about a collaboration. We would like to have a collaboration with other institutes, because if we try to get a budget to develop the standard and to mentor the standard, it's very difficult for us, and it's a new subject in Burundi. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Pierre, for
sorry
that,
because
contribution.
Yes. I'm sorry because my English is not good, because we are good at French.
No problem, no problem. Just so you know.
For another day, we try to translate, because we are Francophone.
Yeah, I understand, and thank you for that feedback. We can try to improve by having translation, but also no worries. Probably most of the people here speak English as a second or third or fourth language as well, so you are in very good company as well. Yeah, I would like to mention that we'll definitely have more discussion of this topic. Of course, we can't finish everything within the time that we do have. But in the SuSanA forum, I have just put a link in the chat. I will be continuing discussing the takeaways from this session today. But just in a minute, if any of you would like to go to the Menti poll, I see somebody already posted, where can I find the standard, which parameters are tested? But if you have any other key takeaways that you would like to post from this session, please feel free to post in that Menti poll. And of course, we can summarize that, of course, with a lot also that has been mentioned in the discussion already about this particular topic. Of course, there's things about how to promote reuse in the face of all these different concerns, but also how to make use of the standard certifications, regulations that are already available, to continue developments in this area. Okay, so we are out of time, but I would like to take this moment to say a warm thank you. I think Mr. Pierre was already taking over my job by thanking the panelists and speakers, Nelson, Sunil, Kate, Daniela, May. You're most welcome for being part of this event. Thank you very much for contributing your time and sharing your expertise and your knowledge about this particular topic. And of course, a warm, big thank you to all the participants. I think at one point we had about 57 people joining in, and some maybe have already left. But thank you to everybody that has been participating in this webinar and for your questions and comments. And suggestions as well. And I think there's a lot of interest in continuing discussions in this area and collaboration. So please do get in touch in the SuSanA forum. We shall be continuing this discussion and, of course, posting some summary of some key takeaways from what has been shared here, as well as the PowerPoint presentations from today, so that you can, use them for networking or further follow-up within your regular work. So thank you very much once again. And yes, I wish you a very good rest of the day, or for those that are in North America, just waking up perhaps, a good start to the day. And for those in the eastern part of the world, also a good end of the day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Daniel. Excellent.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Excellent,
nice
Daniel.
Bye-bye.
Excellent. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.